Greetings Warhammer enthusiast. Before you stands a voice assistant of the podcast, dedicated to spreading the greater good. If you find this information useful, please do not hesitate to leave a like and subscribe. Together, we shall explore the depths of the Warhammer universe and share in its wonders. Mortarion, also known as the Death Lord, the Pale King, or the Reaper of Men, stood as a figure of dread and power among the original 20 Primarchs. Hailing from the toxic world of Barbarus, Mortarion was entrusted with the command of the Death Guard Legion upon the Emperor's arrival. However, the tides of destiny and treachery led him to renounce his allegiance to the Emperor, and swear fealty to the forces of chaos during the cataclysmic event known as the Horus Heresy. In his prime as the Emperor's servant, Mortarion was an imposing figure. His face, ashen and hairless, bore the weight of countless battles. His form was tall and thin, an eerie reflection of the toxic environment he had been raised in. Around his throat, he wore a heavy collar that perpetually released tendrils of poisonous air, a stark reminder of his homeworld. His attire was a testament to his strength and formidable nature. He wore a grey cloak over his unique suit of brass and bare steel power armor, referred to as the Barbaran Plate, a testament to his origins. At his side, he carried the Lantern, a massive handcrafted Shenlongi energy pistol, its power ready to be unleashed on his enemies. Around his waist hung a chain of globe-shaped brass sensors, each filled with the deadly gases of his homeworld, ready to be used as devastating phosphex bombs. However, Mortarion's most defining piece was his signature weapon, the Man-Reaper Silence. This battle scythe stood a foot taller than the Primarch himself, a manifestation of his relentless determination and grim resolve. Guarding Mortarion were the Death Shroud, his personal bodyguard. Two of these formidable warriors were always by his side, never straying more than 49 paces from their master. Listed as killed in action, these Marines lived a life of anonymity, donning masks to hide their identities, known only to Mortarion. They carried their own versions of the Man-Reapers, scaled down to their size, yet every bit as deadly as the Primarch's own. In the bleak expanse of the cosmos, an infant Mortarion found himself on the hostile world of Barbarus. His descent had been like a comet, plunging through the dense toxic fog that covered the planet, to land amidst the wreckage of a fierce battle. The plain was littered with the casualties of warfare, and the air was heavy with death, a grim foretelling of his future moniker, the Reaper of Men. His presence was discovered by the victor of the recent conflict, the most formidable of the warlords who ruled the mountain peaks, far above the poison-laden fog. Compelled by the child's miraculous survival in the toxic atmosphere, the warlord took Mortarion in, giving him a name that echoed the nature of the world they inhabited, Mortarion, Child of Death. The warlord, despite his fearsome reputation and dark powers, had always yearned for an heir. And so, he raised Mortarion behind iron-walled fortresses, imparting to him the arts of warfare and strategy. He molded the Primarch in his own image, preparing him to face the ceaseless battles against rival warlords and their grotesque armies, be they reanimated corpses or demonic monstrosities. Despite his formidable training, Mortarion possessed a deeply ingrained humanity. His sympathy was stirred by the sight of oppressed humans beneath the fog, forced into servitude and used as subjects for grotesque experiments. Ignoring the warlord's threats of retribution, he fled the fortress, descending through the poisonous fog to join his kin. Upon his descent, Mortarion found himself embraced by the warmth of a life previously unknown. He experienced the joy of shared meals, the sound of genuine laughter, and the sight of faces untouched by the choking fog. His empathy for the humans grew stronger, and he vowed to protect them from the tyrannical warlords. Yet, his acceptance into human society was not immediate. His towering figure and pallid skin elicited fear amongst the villagers, but Mortarion remained patient, aiding them in their daily labors, showing his commitment to their welfare. His opportunity for acceptance came in the form of a lesser warlord's raid. The peasants, armed only with their farming tools, struggled against the undead legion. But Mortarion, wielding a mighty scythe, dove into the heart of the battle. His victory over the warlord, whose domain was believed to be unreachable by the humans, solidified his position amongst his newfound kin. Mortarion's influence grew as he traveled from village to village, sharing his knowledge of warfare and defending the settlements against attacks. Blacksmiths were guided to craft weaponry and armor, and the ablest men were formed into elite fighting units. This was the inception of the Death Guard, the first defenders of the people of Barbarus against their oppressors. Over time, Mortarion further engineered crude but effective filtration apparatus for his warriors, allowing them to follow him into the toxic fog that the warlords called home. Their bodies, under the constant exposure to the toxins, grew resilient, a trait that the Death Guard would be renowned for in the epochs to come. They were now the protectors of the oppressed, leading retaliations into the heart of the enemy territory. And in the heart of this unlikely band of warriors stood Mortarion, the Reaper of Men, the beacon of resistance against the tyranny of the warlords. Only a single, cloud-wreathed peak denied Mortarion complete dominion over the monstrous warlords of Barbarus, the pinnacle upon which his adoptive father resided. Despite the daunting task that lay before him, he retreated to his village, confident in his plans to engage in one final battle. But, on his return, whispers of a remarkable visitor bearing promises of salvation filled the air. Mortarion's countenance darkened. He had tirelessly prepared for his final conflict, and he would not share his hard-earned glory with a newcomer. Entering the banquet room in a tempest of frustration, Mortarion found the village elders gathered around a stranger, a figure who was their stark contrast. While the elders bore the markers of their harsh lives in their gaunt, pale features, the newcomer radiated a vitality that was almost alien. His skin was bronzed, and his physique was the epitome of perfection. An unspoken bond connected the stranger and Mortarion, though Mortarion remained ignorant of their shared blood. The stranger issued a challenge to the young Primarch. If Mortarion could conquer the final mansion alone, he could claim his victory. But should he fail, he would submit himself to the stranger's command. Accepting the wager, Mortarion embarked on the ascent to his final battle. Years of pent-up hatred for his adoptive father fueled his march, as he climbed higher into the poison-soaked mists than ever before. When the ultimate confrontation occurred, Mortarion found himself outmatched by the potent toxins that clung to the peak. His protective suit corroded, his breathing grew labored, and his vision wavered. The image of his adoptive father, advancing to end his life, was the last thing Mortarion saw before he succumbed to the poison. However, death did not claim him. Instead, he awoke to find the stranger standing over him, the warlord slain by a single, powerful sweep of the stranger's sword. In that moment, Mortarion bent his knee and swore fealty to his savior. It was then that the stranger revealed himself as the Emperor of Mankind, Mortarion's true father. The Primarch's allegiance was now with the Emperor and his empire. In recognition of his prowess and potential, the Emperor granted Mortarion command of the 14th Legion of Space Marines, the Dusk Raiders. The Reaper of Men had found his place in the grand plan of the Imperium, though the path before him would be as shrouded in fog as the peaks of Barbarus. Mortarion was never one to shy away from his beliefs, nor did he falter in his relentless pursuit of his goals. This unwavering resolve was instilled into the Death Guard, his legion of Space Marines, and they embraced his austere principles. Amongst the pantheon of his Primarch brethren, Mortarion found kinship with only two, the Night Haunter, a figure as shadowy and ominous as himself, and Horus, who would come to be both his closest ally and the harbinger of his damnation. Mortarion's camaraderie with Horus was so deep that it attracted the attention of Robout Guilliman and Korax, both respected Primarchs in their own right. They questioned the Death Lord's loyalties, fearing his unwavering allegiance to Horus might overshadow his devotion to the Emperor. Yet, their concerns were dismissed by their sovereign, for in the Emperor's eyes, loyalty to Horus was tantamount to loyalty to him. Yet, Mortarion's relationships with his brethren were not always congenial. He frequently found himself at odds with Magnus the Red, openly criticizing the use of librarians in his legion. His voice resonated loudly at the Council of Nicaea, advocating for the ban of psychers among the Astartes legions. Such was Mortarion's aversion to the warp and all it embodied. This repugnance only deepened when he uncovered the secret construction of the Golden Throne in the heart of the Imperial Palace, feeling a sense of betrayal at what he perceived as a pact with the warp. It took the sagely words of Malcador to assuage his concerns, explaining that the purpose of the Golden Throne was to emancipate mankind from the warp, not bind them to it. Mortarion's bitter clashes were not limited to Magnus the Red. He harbored a simmering resentment towards his brother Primarchs who he felt had led cushy existences, especially when contrasted against his own torment on Barbarus. Notably, he often found himself at odds with Sanguinius, Jagatai Khan, and Fulgrim, all of whom he believed had been spared the tribulations he had endured. The pall of bitterness hanging over Mortarion was reminiscent of the resentment nursed by Perturabo, another Primarch who felt sidelined and underappreciated during the Great Crusade. Jagatai Khan pointed out that Mortarion, like himself, was one of the few Primarchs whose deeds and history were shrouded in mystery. Despite his deep bond with Horus, Mortarion was critical of his appointment as War Master, not out of any doubt in Horus' capabilities, but due to his belief that the Emperor's decision to name a War Master in the first place had been flawed. He foresaw a rift forming between the Primarchs if the Emperor were to withdraw from the Great Crusade and rely on Horus as his proxy. During the period of the Great Crusade, Mortarion and his legion engaged in a fierce battle against the Xenos race known as the Jorgal. The pivotal Battle of Iota Horologi was set against the backdrop of the imminent Horus Heresy, casting a grim shadow over the unfolding conflict. In this crucial standoff, the Death Guard was reinforced by the enigmatic Sisters of Silence, formidable allies in any engagement. The Imperial forces, unbowed by the alien threat, initiated an aggressive counteroffensive, taking the fight directly to the Jorgal's colony ships. The Death Guard, ever relentless, thrived in these adverse conditions. The colony ship's poisonous atmosphere, which would have debilitated any other force, was but a mere inconvenience to Mortarion's hardened warriors. Kolas Typhon, the first captain, fought side by side with Mortarion, carving through the Jorgal cybernetic soldiers with brutal efficiency. At the same time, Ignatius Grolga executed a daring maneuver. He infiltrated the ship's drive cluster and sabotaged the control of the colony's power core, causing chaos in the enemy's ranks. While the heart of the Jorgal forces grappled with this unexpected disruption, a separate team spearheaded by Captain Nathaniel Goro, along with the Sisters of Silence, pursued another strategic objective. They targeted the colony's hatcheries, sites crucial to the enemy's continued war efforts. Their destructive mission was a success, delivering a crippling blow to the Jorgal's reproductive capacity. Confronted with the overwhelming might of the Imperial forces, the Jorgal's defenses crumbled. Their civilization, once a formidable force, was systematically purged and extinguished in the onslaught. A poignant footnote to this chapter of carnage occurred during the heat of battle. A young Jorgal Psyker, in an encounter with Captain Goro, revealed a disturbing vision of the horrors that were to befall his legion. Goro, however, dismissed it as a deceptive ploy, oblivious to the prophetic nightmare that the Psyker's words held. Little did he know that the seeds of their damnation had already been sown, and the specter of the Horus Heresy was closing in. Winning Mortarion over to his cause was a significant challenge for Horus, more so than Angron or Fulgrim had ever posed. For a while, it seemed as if the War Master might fail in his endeavor. Mortarion had grown increasingly disillusioned with the Emperor, seeing in him a warp-tainted aberration, an echo of his tyrannical adoptive father. Sensing this, Horus carefully leveraged Mortarion's deep-seated distrust of the warp, asserting that the Emperor himself had made use of the warp in the creation of the Primarchs. He stoked Mortarion's doubt, ultimately exploiting it to sway the Lord of the Death Guard to his side. As the cloak of betrayal fell upon the Imperium, Mortarion led his legion into the infamous Battle of Istvan III and the subsequent drop site massacre. His treachery, however, did not end there. He attempted to convince Jagatai Khan to join the rebellion, confronting him on Prospero. Their ensuing battle was a clash of opposing strengths. The Great Khan was quick and nimble, while the Death Lord exhibited unmatched resilience. After this epic confrontation, Mortarion gave up the pursuit of the elusive White Scars, and turned his attention to a vindictive purge of the systems surrounding Prospero. Here, he faced a disconcerting challenge. A demon, in the guise of a woman, confronted Mortarion. Despite his aversion to the warp and the violation of the Imperial dogma, which by this point was ironically also his own, he was compelled to use his innate psychic abilities to eliminate the threat. This experience marked a turning point for Mortarion. He was faced with the undeniable truth that the Emperor had lied about the Empyrean, shattering any lingering illusions. Filled with a newfound resolve, he vowed to command the very power that he had once held in contempt, to master the Empyrean. The stage for Mortarion's next grand act was set at the Battle of Dwell. Horus, seeking to claim the Emperor's powers for himself on the planet Molech, summoned both Mortarion and Fulgrim to aid him in this audacious quest. Their meeting was not without peril. Shadrach Medicine, set on bringing an end to the Primarchs, launched an audacious assassination attempt. He unleashed a trio of fire raptors, fully armed gunships capable of bringing destruction from the skies. Yet, Mortarion, with his famed resilience, survived this daring assault, further solidifying his legend. Following this attempt on their lives, the battle on Molech commenced. In the ensuing chaos, Mortarion was forced to make a brutal choice. He sacrificed several of his loyal Deathshroud warriors, a decision not made lightly, but one he saw as necessary to allow for the resurrection of Ignatius Grolga. A complex weave of duty, survival, and dark ambition was thus spun in the heart of the Battle of Molech, as Mortarion continued to navigate the treacherous path he had chosen in his pledge to Horus. In the throes of the heresy, Mortarion found himself in the thick of the Battle of the Caelium Gate. This was a period when his knowledge of the forbidden and arcane had deepened remarkably. He delved into the mysteries of both Xenos and Chaos artifacts, pledging to maintain purity through comprehension rather than ignorance. It was during this time that Horus tasked Mortarion with the formidable assignment of locating and annihilating the elusive White Scars. They had been a persistent thorn in the side of the traitors since the fateful events on Prospero. Mortarion was initially hesitant, but Horus' declaration that he was the only Primarch he could still depend on stirred him. Mortarion found a resonant chord of competitiveness within him, eager to square off against the Khan. The subsequent Battle of Catalus saw the joint Death Guard Emperor's Children fleet under Mortarion's command Konor, the White Scars fleet at the Dark Glass artifact. Determined, Mortarion boarded Jagatai's flagship, the Swordstorm, only to discover an empty vessel save for a group of Sagyamazan warriors, their eyes ablaze with suicidal resolve. Complications mounted when Mortarion discovered the Swordstorm's reactors had been set to overload, and the Khan had evacuated to the battleship Lance of Heaven, leading the Loyalist fleet's escape into the Webway. Hemmed in by the Sagyamazan and the ship's reactivated void shields, Mortarion orchestrated a brutal annihilation of the Scar's rear guard while instructing his fleet to concentrate fire on the Swordstorm's shields. With the shields depleted and after he personally vanquished Torgun Khan, Mortarion narrowly managed to teleport off the Swordstorm just as it detonated in a catastrophic explosion. After the dust settled from the battle, Mortarion acknowledged that the fragmented state of his fleet had crippled the war effort. He promptly ordered Eidolon to seek out Kolar's Typhon and his wayward splinter fleet, hoping to regain some semblance of order and unity in the midst of the escalating chaos. In the aftermath of these war-ridden campaigns, Mortarion received new orders from Horus to converge with Terra. Mortarion took the helm and guided his loyal Death Guard, reuniting with the main fleet under the leadership of the enigmatic Kolar's Typhon. They had been locking horns with the Dark Angel's fleet in an intricate dance of deception and misdirection following the Battle of Perditus. On the shadowy world of YNYX, Mortarion and Typhon joined forces once again, their formidable fleet setting course for Terra, where the final battle was poised to erupt. However, Mortarion was troubled. The brother he had once trusted implicitly, Typhon, seemed changed, not quite the warrior he had once known. Regardless, Typhon managed to persuade Mortarion to undertake the looming journey within the formidable vessel known as the Terminus Estate rather than the Endurance. The air of mistrust thickened once their vessels were immersed in the warp. Typhon instigated a chilling act of betrayal, accusing all of the fleet's navigators of being agents of Malcador. He commanded his grave wardens to execute all the navigators, yet assured Mortarion that he and his specialists could navigate the warp's treacherous currents to reach Terra. Yet this was not the end of Typhon's treachery. A virulent plague known as the Destroyer Hive ravaged the Death Guard, transmuting them into grotesque mutants who could not be released by death. The plague seemed to have no cure, and the once mighty Death Guard found themselves bound by an insignificant disease. Even Mortarion, in all his might, fell prey to the infection. Enraged, Mortarion confronted Typhon aboard the Terminus estate. The seeds of treachery had been sown, and Typhon admitted to his deceit, yet claimed it was for a higher purpose. The two engaged in a duel, Typhon's psychic abilities providing him some defense against the Primarch's wrath. Despite the odds, Mortarion prevailed, striking down Typhon with his scythe. However, Typhon rose again, buoyed by the insidious power of the Destroyer Hive. Mortarion, realizing the fight was far from over, unleashed the deformed Ignatius Grolga, who in turn strangled Typhon to death. Yet, Typhon revived again, laughing in the face of Mortarion's incredulity and despair. Overwhelmed by the pestilent destroyer plague, Mortarion's reality warped. He hallucinated his past struggles on Barbarus, his failed attempt to resist the lethal toxins to reach his father's fortress. In this delirium, he heard the voice of Nurgle, the god of decay, promising an end to his torment in return for his submission, with new powers of resilience and strength. Mortarion was shown a memory of standing before the Emperor after failing to assassinate his father, and in this moment of desperation, he capitulated. He pledged his allegiance to Nurgle and the torturous affliction ceased. According to a demon known as the Remnant, Mortarion had allowed Typhus to corrupt the Death Guard as he saw no other path for the survival of his sons. What emerged from the ethereal bowels of the warp was a grotesque caricature of the once proud Death Guard. Their armor, once a symbol of their resolute might and gleaming pride, was now marred by corrosion and decay. It barely managed to contain the bulging forms of the Space Marines, their bodies distended with pustules and the sickly bloom of disease. The vestiges of their weapons and armor, now imbued with the chaotic energy of the warp, transformed these afflicted warriors into the Plague Marines. Yet, they clung onto their old identity, insisting on being known as the Death Guard. During the dreadful Siege of Terra, Mortarion was the last traitor Primarch to make his appearance in the Sol system. The Lord of Death materialized on board the Vengeful Spirit, his putrid stench so overwhelming that all aboard, save for Horus, Abaddon, and Tormigdan, succumbed to violent convulsions. Ever true to his earlier promise, Horus permitted Mortarion's Death Guard to be the first to land upon Terra. Throughout the harrowing battle on Terra, Mortarion exerted his influence over the western regions of the palace. His very presence was a blight, spreading plague and suffering wherever he went. Unlike his fellow traitor Primarchs, Angron and Fulgrim, Mortarion did not seek to breach the psychic shield the Emperor had cast around the palace. During a strategic war council, Mortarion expressed his scorn for Perturabo for not fully surrendering to chaos, but nevertheless, he allowed Typhus to collaborate with the Iron Warriors Primarch as part of a ritual intended to weaken the Emperor's psychic shield around the palace. Later, Mortarion met with Magnus to discuss an assault on the Colossi Gate. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Mortarion confessed to his brother that he despised his current demonic form and was in constant agony. Magnus lent his aid, helping Mortarion to harness his new abilities and thereby regain his lost composure. Filled with gratitude, Mortarion swiftly set in motion an attack on the Colossi Gate. This assault would provide a distraction, a smokescreen for Magnus as he sought to infiltrate the formidable Imperial dungeon. Before Mortarion's fateful clash with Jagatai Khan, he stormed the Marmax Bastion alongside Typhus, only to be faced by Nathaniel Goro, his wayward son. Goro, refusing Mortarion's offer to rejoin the Death Guard, boldly challenged his father to a duel. His goal was noble and desperate, to buy time for Euphrati Keeler to escape the impending carnage. In the beginning, Mortarion treated this confrontation with disdain, toying with Goro in a bid to humiliate him. However, after sustaining an unexpected injury, Mortarion's amusement turned to rage, and he struck Goro down. With a cruel sneer, Mortarion proclaimed that he would make Goro into an undead puppet, serving him for eternity. As he summoned a colossal swarm of flies to transform Goro into a monstrous creation of Nurgle, a miraculous intervention occurred. Infused with the Emperor's power by Keeler, Goro was able to momentarily hold Mortarion at bay. Yet, he was ultimately outmatched by the demon Primarch's overwhelming might. Goro fell, but not before he had left Mortarion with a painful wound in his neck, courtesy of the broken shard of Libertas. After Perturabo and his Iron Warriors had withdrawn from Terra, Horus assigned the Lion's Gate spaceport to Mortarion, which he converted into his personal stronghold. However, this sanctuary was soon assailed in a massive counterattack led by Mortarion's old adversary, Jaghatai Khan, who commanded a force of White Scars and the Imperial army. The battle for the spaceport resulted in a fierce face-off between the two Primarchs. Despite being confronted by Mortarion's daunting demonic resilience and strength, Khan was brutally beaten down and left nearly defenseless. However, he found Mortarion's weak point, his pride. Scolding Mortarion for his weakness in succumbing to the powers of the warp, Khan emphasized his own resilience against the temptations of chaos and his unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. Infuriated, Mortarion lost his cool, providing an opening for Khan to launch a flurry of devastating attacks that overwhelmed the demon Primarch. In the end, a gravely wounded Jaghatai Khan found himself impaled on Mortarion's scythe. Showing extraordinary bravery and resolve, Khan pulled himself along the length of the blade to confront the Death Guard Primarch face to face. In this climactic moment, the loyalist Primarch decapitated Mortarion, who was banished into the warp in an explosion resembling the effects of a vortex weapon. Later, Khan's badly wounded body was recovered by Imperial forces. After the monumental defeat of Horus, Mortarion resurfaced from the shadows. His sights were set on the Plague Planet in the Eye of Terra, a grim and perilous realm that he claimed as his new dominion. This was not an arbitrary choice. The Plague Planet, rife with toxins, was a ghastly reflection of Barbarus, Mortarion's blighted homeworld. It was a realm that spoke to Mortarion's essence, mirroring his troubled past and eternal torment. Shaping this accursed world into a nightmarish haven was no simple feat, but Mortarion was driven by a burning ambition. He sought to recreate the toxic death world of his own childhood, where horror and misery ruled supreme. Like a macabre artist, he painstakingly sculpted this desolate landscape, nurturing its inherent toxins, boosting its lethal aura. He ensured that every nook and cranny of this grotesque haven reverberated with pestilence and decay, making it a testament to his personal history and his newfound allegiance. Nurgle, the god of decay and despair, looked upon Mortarion's relentless work with something akin to paternal pride. Here was a creation that mirrored his own nightmarish vision, a world that thrived on the very concepts he held dear. Pleased with Mortarion's dedication and the fruits of his labor, Nurgle bestowed upon him a grand reward. Mortarion was elevated to the ranks of the Demon Princes, a position of great power and influence within the chaotic hierarchy. For Mortarion, this was a long-awaited victory. He finally had a world of his own, a realm that he could shape and command. Yet the irony of his position was not lost on him. He had come to embody a figure strikingly similar to his tyrannical stepfather on Barbarus. Now ruling over a domain of poison, horror, and misery, he had come full circle. Mortarion was finally home, albeit in the grim and unforgiving embrace of a world shaped by his darkest memories. In the aftermath of the heresy, Mortarion, now an ascended demon prince, chose a life of seclusion. The affairs of the materium, the material universe, seemed trivial to him, a petty game of powers that no longer held his interest. His attention was now drawn towards the great game, the eternal struggle between the gods of chaos for dominance over the warp. Shutting himself away from the world, Mortarion became an elusive figure, even to those who served him. His presence on the Plague Planet became a rarity, as he turned his back on the material realm, seeking solace in his own thoughts and ambitions. He withdrew from the active leadership of his Death Guard, leaving them largely autonomous. These once unified warriors, now splintered into individual warbands, were left to conduct their campaigns without their Primarch's direct involvement. But even in his self-imposed isolation, Mortarion's influence could not be entirely erased from the galaxy's affairs. On a number of occasions, he emerged from his solitude, making his mark on the ebb and flow of galactic events. These rare appearances were pivotal moments, testaments to Mortarion's enduring presence and his persistent role in the ongoing cosmic dance of power and warfare. Each time Mortarion appeared, he reminded the universe of his existence, of the Plague Planet's power, and of the Death Guard's resilience. His seclusion did not diminish his impact, it only made it more pronounced. His reclusiveness became a part of his legend, His sporadic intervention a constant reminder of the lurking threat that he and his forces posed, a silent promise of the decay and destruction they were capable of inflicting upon the Mortarion. On an unfortunate turn of events, the Imperial world of Sanctia found itself under siege. The attack was initiated by a rampant warband of orcs, who exhibited behavior unusual even for their brutish kind. An insatiable, almost demonic hunger seemed to grip them, compelling them to consume everything in their path, the living, the dead, the defenders of the planet, and its inhabitants. As they gorged on flesh and bone, the orcs transformed into grotesque monstrosities, so bloated that they could only move at a snail's pace. Witnessing this bizarre turn of events, the Adepta Sororitas moved to action, systematically purging the lumbering orc monstrosities from the planet. But their battle was not over. For at the height of their struggle, a new threat arose, one more formidable than they could have imagined. Mortarion, the Primarch and Demon Prince at the helm of the Death Guard, descended upon Sanctia. As Mortarion made planetfall, he commanded the bloated corpses of the orcs to explode, revealing a grotesque sight. The innards of the orcs were teeming with Nurglings, the diminutive, pestilent demons of Nurgle. In less than a day, the Death Guard and the demons of Nurgle swept across Sanctia, leaving nothing but death and destruction in their wake. Mortarion, steering this vessel of chaos, spread the gruesome plague not only across Sanctia but the entire ecclesiarchy-held system at an alarming, unstoppable pace. His unrelenting assault transformed the system into a festering petri dish of decay and disease, a testament to Nurgle's pervasive, corrupting influence. Through his actions on Sanctia, Mortarion proved once again the terrifying power he and the Death Guard wielded, spreading death and decay in the name of their loathsome patron, Nurgle. In an unfortunate turn of events, the Death Guard, led by the demon Primarch Mortarion himself, engaged in a brutal conflict with the Grey Knights, under the command of Supreme Grand Master Geronitan. This conflict, known as the Battle of Kornovin, occurred after Mortarion's unrelenting onslaught across numerous sectors. However, the Grey Knights chose to make their stand on the planet of Kornovin, guided by Geronitan's firm belief in its strategic significance. The battle waged on with fierce intensity, with neither side giving any quarter. Tragedy befell the Grey Knights when their leader, Geronitan, was slain by Mortarion himself. Following this devastating loss, the Grey Knights were pushed back, forced to retreat to their last bastion on the planet, while the advancing horde of demons threatened to overrun them. In their darkest hour, the Grand Masters of the Grey Knights convened a psychic conclave. Amidst the ruins of their stronghold, they selected Calder Drago as the new Supreme Grand Master. As part of his ascension, Drago was psychically imbued with Mortarion's true name, the very name the Emperor had intended for him. Armed with this potent knowledge, Drago sought out Mortarion, determined to avenge his fallen brethren. First, he had to cut his way through Mortarion's death-shroud bodyguards. Then, face to face with the Primarch himself, Drago was tested to his limits. Despite his valiant efforts, he was no match for the Demon Prince's might. On the brink of defeat, Drago summoned the last of his strength and unleashed a final psychic blast. This disrupted Mortarion's mental defenses, providing Drago the opening he needed. Seizing the moment, Drago uttered Mortarion's true name. In that instant, the Demon Prince's body was shattered. Displaying a measure of defiance and retribution, Drago ripped Mortarion's heart from his body and carved Geronitan's name into it. Mortarion's physical form was annihilated, and his spirit was cast into the Immaterium. The encounter marked a significant blow to the Primarch, one that he would never forget, forever bearing the sting of the insult Drago had handed him that day. In the waning days of an era, Robout Guilliman, one of the revered Primarchs, was miraculously resurrected. This event did not go unnoticed by Mortarion, who, after an extended period of seclusion, found himself reinvigorated by his brother's rebirth. Inspired, Mortarion made a resolute decision to lead the entirety of the Death Guard in a new and relentless campaign. With a cruel sense of creativity, Mortarion crafted 7 unique diseases with the hand of darkness, each more virulent than the last. Among these maladies was a plague that induced blindness, a scourge that swiftly swept across the vast reaches of Ultramar. The affliction was formidable, and only Guilliman's presence had the power to cure the disease. The Plague Wars was a series of devastating encounters that erupted within the realm of Ultramar. The chaos was stirred by the forces of Nurgle, the Chaos God, against the sturdy bastions of the Imperium. This turmoil unfurled in the aftermath of the initial phase of the monumental Indomitus Crusade. The root of this destructive conflict was sowed by Nurgle. As though gripped by envy, the Chaos God desired to annex the thriving worlds of Ultramar into his grotesque domain, the Garden of Nurgle. He orchestrated his grand scheme by mobilizing his legions to establish cults of corruption. This was accompanied by the proliferation of various lethal diseases throughout 3 proximate Imperial systems, located galactically north of Ultramar. These systems, which fell under Nurgle's foul control, would henceforth be known as the Scourge Stars. From these corrupted strongholds, new assaults against the realm of Ultramar were launched, the aim being to annex these worlds into the Plague Father's garden. These diseases wreaked havoc on countless worlds, but it wasn't until the creation of the Great Rift, during the 13th Black Crusade, that Nurgle decided to fully enact his nefarious plans. At the forefront of Nurgle's onslaught stood the Death Guard, led by none other than Mortarion. With a massive invasion fleet at his command, Mortarion launched a sweeping invasion of Ultramar. However, he did not lead this assault unaided. 2 other commanders, each with vast armies at their disposal, emerged from the Scourge Stars, each desiring the dubious honor of earning Nurgle's favor. Typhus, the first captain of the Death Guard, led the Plague Fleet, an unsightly flotilla filled with renegades, cultists, and his loyal Death Guard. The third major force comprised a host of demons led by the Great Unclean One, Kugath. Mortarion's force was massive, too large for the defenders of Ultramar to confront directly, yet not large enough to risk an assault on Macragge itself. Regardless, Mortarion initiated several smaller-scale attacks on Macragge, primarily deploying plague drones and cultists. His strategy was one of attrition, draining the resources and morale of Ultramar. At the same time, Mortarion set his sights on more vulnerable worlds, indiscriminately slaughtering the population to provoke Guilliman into direct confrontation. The once verdant garden world of Ajax bore the brunt of the Plaguefather's invasion, becoming an ideal incubator for a host of new diseases. As Ispander and Ardium fell under relentless siege, Typhus led a secondary fleet to terrorize the outer regions of Ultramar, obliterating 3 of the 6 major star forts overseeing Ultramar's shipping lanes. On Ajax, a group of refugee Imperial Guard carried the taint of Nurgle with them. This contamination resulted in their grotesque transformation into plague-bearers, and facilitated the manifestation of a cohort of great unclean ones. These relentless assaults spurred the Imperium into action. They rallied to Ultramar's defense, culminating in a fierce series of battles known as the Plague Wars, forever remembered as a time of great strife for the empire of mankind. After the conclusion of the monumental Indomitus Crusade, Guilliman, armed with reinforcements, swooped in to deliver much-needed respite to the besieged realm of Ultramar. The intensity of the ongoing conflict had severely exhausted Ultramar's defenses, and the arrival of Guilliman's forces heralded a beacon of hope in these dark times. Guilliman's first order of business was to rid the hive world of Ardium, located in the Macragge system, of its menacing Death Guard occupiers. This fortified bastion, a hive of productivity, had fallen under the gruesome grip of the Death Guard. Their presence was a blight on the world, stifling its vibrancy and miring it in desolation. It was in the throes of this fierce struggle to reclaim Ardium that Guilliman made a chilling discovery. He learned of Mortarion's manipulation of the ancient artifact known as the Hand of Darkness. This powerful object was being utilized to create nightmarish constructs known as plague engines. These horrific machines were capable of an unholy feat. They were reanimating the dead and warping them into plague zombies. These shambling abominations, devoid of their previous humanity, were a grotesque testament to the corrupting influence of Nurgle. With newfound determination, Guilliman focused his efforts on the destruction of the plague engine ensconced within Ardium. The battle was arduous, with each step forward met with resistance from the Death Guard and their undead thralls. However, under Guilliman's unwavering leadership, his forces persevered, systematically dismantling the enemy's defenses until the plague engine was within reach. The moment of triumph came when Guilliman, in a final push, shattered the plague engine. With its destruction, the grim spell over Ardium was broken, freeing the world from the oppressive influence of Nurgle. The surviving populace, though scarred by the horrors they had witnessed, were finally able to begin the long process of healing and recovery. With one world liberated, Guilliman set his sights on the rest of Ultramar, resolved to rid his realm of the Death Guard's presence. In the wake of the successful counterattack led by the Ultramarines, the Death Guard were pressed into regaining their lost momentum. Their strategic eyes fell upon the Konor system, a gem in the crown of Ultramar. The forge world of Konor, nestled within this system, was an industrial titan, producing the vital munitions and machinery that sustained the Imperial war machine. Richly populated, flourishing, and guarded by a substantial defense force, the Konor system was a living testament to the majestic vision of Ultramar. Its significance was amplified by its strategic location, safeguarding one of the few stable warp transit routes to the Macragge system. Their dark plot, if successful, would expose the sector's mightiest Imperial stronghold to danger, isolating Guilliman and his forces within Ultramar and obstructing a system-wide counterattack, or any substantial reinforcement to the besieged worlds. However, Imperial reinforcements, in a desperate race against time, rushed to the beleaguered Konor system. By the time they arrived, the forces of chaos had already burrowed deep into the system's core worlds. Focusing their efforts, the Imperials were determined to shatter the Siege of Asteramis, the most densely populated world in the system. Despite the fierce struggle that erupted within the bustling hive cities of the planet, the defenders of Ultramar eventually prevailed. Boosted by fresh conscripts from Asteramis, they proceeded to liberate the worlds of Konor and Nethamus. On Konor, the war morphed into a monstrous spectacle of industrial ruination. The once thriving manufactorums were now shattered, and debris-laden labor halls served as the grim battleground. Backed by newly reinforced Astra Militarum veterans, the Loyalist counteroffensive overwhelmed the beleaguered forces of chaos. They recaptured the planet and immediately rebooted the planet's industrial machinery within mere hours of the battle's conclusion. Next in line for liberation was Nethamus, known as the breadbasket of the Konor system. As the Imperial fleet seared away the vast expanses of Nurglite corruption threatening the planet's continental crop fields, massive factory crawlers fended off successive waves of armored assaults by the Chaos forces. The crawlers bore the task of protecting their precious cargo and ensuring its safe transport to the waiting Imperial bulk transports in orbit. The ceaseless influx of Imperial reinforcements not only salvaged the convoys but eventually purged the planet of Nurglites. Nethamus, though marred by firestorms and obscured by towering clouds of smoke, clung tenaciously to life. The Imperial offensive, while making significant headway, was not without setbacks. One significant defeat took place on Vanator, the system's astropathic relay. Sorcerers allied with the invaders had transformed the lush jungle planet into a psychic beacon, drawing horrors from the warp to spill onto the planet's surface in demonic hordes. Despite the deployment of the Grey Knights, specialized in combating such entities, the counter-invasion failed, leaving Vanator under the sway of chaos. Drenthal, the ocean world serving as a base for the Aeronautica Imperialis and a docking yard for the Konor defense fleet, also fell to the enemy. A vast Chaos armada, teeming with Heldrakes and Plague drones, staged a relentless attack on Drenthal. Despite the valiant efforts of the Imperial air power, the Loyalists were forced to retreat, leaving the planet under the grip of the Nurglites for the duration of the campaign. The Imperials barely had time to regroup before another crisis loomed. The death world of Lobos, an isolated planet on the system's periphery, was manipulated to hurl through the system like a plague-ridden comet. As it moved, it spread corruption and death, scattering Nurgle's pestilential gifts to each world it passed. This marked Mortarion's final ploy in the struggle for Konor, an entire world weaponized, propelled by vast, continent-sized engines and the malevolent energies of the warp. Desperate to halt this catastrophe, the Loyalists committed the remainder of their forces in a perilous attempt to destroy Lobos before it could spread its corruption throughout the Konor system. The Imperial Navy dispatched every available transport ship, cargo hulk, and battlecruiser, each vessel crammed with soldiers and vehicles. Despite heavy fleet losses, the bulk of the Imperial assault managed to land and initiate their assault on the Death Guard strongholds, and the colossal warp engines powering the planet. As the combined might of the Imperial Guard and Adeptus Astartes reduced Death Guard fortresses to rubble, squads of elite warriors infiltrated the vast engines that moved the planet. These specialists penetrated the heart of the fusion core, where they manually detonated a cyclonic warhead, triggering an explosion of apocalyptic proportions that tore the planetary core asunder. The surviving Imperial forces retreated to their evacuation points, a desperate scramble to reach their spacecraft and escape the doomed world. The planet's detonation hurled massive fragments of its rock and molten core through space, wreaking havoc on both Imperial and Chaos vessels. Miraculously, no neighboring world was impacted by the catastrophe. The death of Lobos marked the salvation of the Konor system, signaling the end of a grueling campaign. Despite the timely arrival of Guilliman, the onslaught across Ultramar was too widespread to contain fully. It was the opportune reinforcement from the Ultramarines' successor chapters and Forge worlds that enabled Guilliman to grasp the initiative. A counteroffensive named the Spear of Ispander was launched on the beleaguered Ispander, arresting the Chaos advance and leading to a stalemate. This campaign targeted not only to reclaim the fallen Ispander system but also sever the Death Guard's connection to the Scourge Stars, from where they received a ceaseless stream of reinforcements. The forces of the Ultramarines and their allies methodically recaptured each conquered world in the Ispander system, systematically eliminating the plague engines that ceaselessly churned out plague zombies. An intense confrontation saw the Ultramarines' original chapter fighting alongside their Primaries Astartes brethren for the first time. This alliance succeeded in routing the forces of Nurgle from Ispander. The grand finale was delivered by Guilliman himself, as he felled the great unclean one Karamar using the Emperor's sword, and destroyed the system's last plague engine. Ispander had finally been purged of the plague god's contamination, and Nurgle's minions found their ties to the Scourge Stars severed. A series of counterattacks were then launched by Guilliman across the system. Mortarion, witnessing the stalemate on Ispander, decided to shift his attention and joined forces with Kugath. The situation was turning increasingly dire for the invaders. Their supply lines to the Scourge Stars were severed, their plague engines were being steadily eliminated, reducing the tide of undead reinforcements, and an influx of Imperial forces was imminent. The commanders decided to focus their efforts against Parmenio. The plains of Hecaton on Parmenio became the theater for the largest armored and Titan conflict of the war. Guilliman led a fierce charge against Kugatha's vanguard, successfully eliminating his lieutenant, Septicus. The space battle was equally intense. Despite suffering heavy casualties including the loss of Nova Marines chapter master Bardan Davaro, during a boarding by the Plague Fleet, the Ultramarines and their allies began to turn the tide on Parmenio, as Guilliman led a relief force to Ajax. In an attempt to outsmart Guilliman, the Death Guard commanders lured the Primarch to Parmenio where they sprung a trap. Confronted by the combined forces of Mortarion and Kugath, Guilliman found himself at the brink of defeat. However, a miraculous intervention came in the form of a living saint, a young girl radiating with the power of the Emperor. The sight of this divine apparition pushed back the forces of Nurgle, saving Guilliman and providing a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. The final and decisive clash of the Plague Wars was poised to erupt on Ajax. Mortarion and Kugath hatched a devious plot to ensnare Guilliman and annihilate him using a lethal disease known as the Godblight. Their sinister plan, however, suffered a significant blow due to the outbreak of the war in the Rift. As a result, many of Nurgle's demons were recalled and Typhus was forced to safeguard the Scourge Stars with a large fraction of the Death Guard. Ignoring Nurgle's orders, Mortarion and Kugath pressed ahead with their plans to extinguish Guilliman and transform Ultramar into an extension of the Garden of Nurgle. Aware of the impending trap, Guilliman knew that he must confront Mortarion in order to safeguard Ajax. The Indomitus Crusade fleet Primus initiated an invasion of the planet, battling the monstrous forces of Nurgle's demons, followed by the remaining Death Guard who sided with Mortarion. Guilliman faced Mortarion in a duel of destiny, while Space Marine and Cadian forces sought to obliterate Kugatha's fragment of the Cauldron of Nurgle, the source of Chaos's power in the sector. In a desperate struggle, 7 Space Marines led by Edermo and Justinian Paris, along with Colonel Odromire, succeeded in defeating Kugath, thanks to the intervention of militant apostolic Matiu, who transformed into a living saint, channeling the power of the Emperor. Odremiah sacrificed his life to slay Kugath, while Matiu succeeded in obliterating the cauldron. Simultaneously, Guilliman found himself bested by Mortarion, whose warp-enhanced strength and resilience gave him the upper hand. Mortarion pinned Guilliman to the ground and administered the Godblight. Guilliman's body went limp, as if the last loyalist Primarch had drawn his final breath. Teetering between life and death, Guilliman was enveloped in a surreal vision of his encounter with the Emperor after the Terran Crusade. An infusion of holy energy coursed through him, reviving him. He found himself able to channel the Emperor's power, landing a devastating blow to the Garden of Nurgle itself. Mortarion, defeated and broken, retreated with his surviving forces. Tribune Colquhoun of the Adeptus Custodes managed to evacuate Guilliman, Matiu, and many other warriors of the Imperium from Ajax before the fleet Primus executed Exterminatus on the diseased world. Thus, with the foiling of the Chaos plot on Ajax, the Plague Wars effectively came to an end. In the wake of the grueling Plague Wars, Guilliman oversaw a period of much-needed reconstruction and decontamination across Ultramar. This period, albeit brief, saw significant advancements, including the establishment of new protocols for creating more primary space marines within the Ultramarines' ranks. However, the reprieve didn't last long. The galaxy's relentless turmoil called upon Guilliman, the Lord Commander of the Imperium, pulling him away from Ultramar and thrusting him back into the heart of cosmic battles. In the aftermath, the Ultramarines initiated what would be known as the Vengeance Campaigns. With vengeance burning in their hearts, they marshaled a coalition of their successor chapters and knight houses, and embarked on a crusade across neighboring star systems of Ultramar. These territories had been engulfed by Nurgle's forces at the beginning of the Plague Wars. Notable among these efforts was Marneus Calga's courageous attempt to liberate the besieged worlds of the Tartella system. For Nurgle's forces, the war symbolized a considerable defeat. Concurrently, the war in the Rift posed a new threat to Nurgle's realm, with rival gods laying siege to his domain. The Plaguefather's Garden, a horrifying embodiment of Nurgle's power, was dealt a severe blow, the shockwaves of which reverberated throughout the warp. Furthermore, Mortarion and Kugath, the masterminds of the Plague Wars, fell out of Nurgle's favor due to their disobedience in refusing to retreat to the Scourge Stars when commanded. Their stubborn defiance, coupled with the failure of their plans, left their standing in the eyes of the Plaguefather severely diminished. In the wake of the Great Rift's creation, a cataclysm that tore the very fabric of reality asunder, a new war began. This conflict, known as the War of Rust and Ruin, was sparked by the insatiable ambition of the demon Primarch Mortarion. Leading his fearsome Death Guard, Mortarion invaded the world of Dissactis. His target, the Temple of Ascension, rumored to contain secrets and powers beyond comprehension. However, Mortarion's plans did not go unchallenged. He found himself confronted by none other than his brother Perturabo, at the helm of a massive force of Iron Warriors and the monstrous Chaos Titans of Legio Abhorax. The presence of these rival forces ignited an explosive conflict, as the demon Primarchs led their armies in a brutal display of power and fury. Demons were summoned from the warp to aid both sides, adding to the chaos and destruction. The Iron Warriors and the Legio Abhorax inflicted grievous casualties among the Death Guard, their firepower tearing through Mortarion's forces. But as the battle raged on, the insidious contagions and metal-eating poxes carried by the Death Guard began to spread through Perturabo's forces. The tides of war started to shift as Iron Warriors fell, their bodies succumbing to the diseases, and their war machines, along with the Chaos Titans of Legio Abhorax, began to rust and shut down. The corruption of their machine spirits was too overwhelming. Mortarion seized the opportunity that this unexpected turn of events provided. His forces, now having the upper hand, pushed back with renewed fervor. Perturabo, seeing his army crumbling under the lethal contagions of the Death Guard, was forced to withdraw. His forces lay in ruin, the once mighty war machines nothing more than rusted hulks. The Death Guard, despite the heavy losses they had suffered, were triumphant. Mortarion now stood unchallenged, and he finally laid claim to the Temple of Ascension. The ancient secrets that lay hidden within the temple were now his to uncover. This hard-fought victory marked a new chapter in the endless wars of the grim, dark future.